Silence is often misunderstood in relationships and interactions because people equate it with passivity, with weakness, or with surrender. But silence, when used deliberately and consciously, becomes one of the most powerful tools a person can ever possess. It is not the silence of fear. It is not the silence of confusion. And it is not the silence of being lost for words. It is the silence of control, the silence of strength, and the silence of discipline. When someone wrongs you, disrespects you, or underestimates your value, the natural instinct is to respond immediately, to shout, to argue, to explain yourself, or to fight for recognition. But what happens when you don't do that? What happens when you choose silence instead? That silence speaks louder than anything you could have said. Because in that silence, you are demonstrating that you will not waste your energy convincing someone who already knows deep inside what they did. Words can often blur the truth. They create noise. They can be twisted, ignored, or drowned out. But silence cannot be argued with. Silence sits heavy on the conscience of the other person. The longer you remain silent, the louder their own thoughts begin to echo back to them. They start questioning themselves, questioning their choices, questioning what they lost, and questioning why you're not reacting the way they expected. Because silence disrupts the pattern. Most people thrive on reaction. They want to provoke you so they can feel validated in their actions, so they can control the outcome of the situation. When you don't give them that reaction, you break the cycle, and suddenly the power shifts. They can't feed off your energy anymore. They're left alone with their own guilt, their own reflection, and their own awareness of what they've done. Silence in this way becomes a shield. It protects your dignity because you're not lowering yourself to a battlefield that was never worth your presence. You're not fighting for a place in someone's mind. You're allowing them to wrestle with themselves. Think about this. When you remain silent, you are not only holding back words, you are also holding back your energy, your time, your presence, your emotional investment. You are withdrawing everything that made you accessible to them, and that absence becomes louder than any confrontation ever could. This is why silence is not weakness. Weakness is losing control of your emotions and handing your power over to someone else. Strength is mastering your emotions and deciding consciously that your peace is worth more than their approval. In silence, you also discover yourself. Because silence is not just about them regretting what they did. It's also about you finding your strength in stillness. You realize you don't need to scream to prove your worth. You don't need to beg to be understood. You don't need to argue to be validated. Your value exists independent of their acknowledgement. And when you stand in that awareness, silence becomes your ally. The longer you hold it, the clearer it becomes to them that you are not desperate, that you are not shaken, and that you will not compromise your self-respect. Silence also carries mystery. Human beings are wired to seek answers, to close gaps, to resolve uncertainty. When you are silent, you create that uncertainty. They don't know what you're thinking, they don't know what you're planning, and they don't know where you stand. That gap unsettles them. It forces their imagination to run wild. And imagination is powerful because what they imagine in their minds will often torment them more than what you could have said directly. They begin to wonder if you've moved on, if you've grown stronger, if you've forgotten them, or if you've built a life without them. That silence becomes a mirror reflecting their insecurities and amplifying their regrets. Notice how the greatest displays of strength are often quiet. Mountains do not speak, yet they stand firm. The ocean does not need to announce its depth, yet it commands respect. The sun does not argue with the darkness, it simply rises, and the darkness disappears. That is what silence does for you. It allows you to stand firm, unmoved, unshaken, radiating strength without needing to announce it. And just like the ocean, the mountain, and the sun, your silence cannot be ignored. It is felt even more profoundly than words. So when you choose silence after being wronged, remember that you are not being weak. You are demonstrating supreme control. You are showing that you do not need to waste your breath explaining to someone who already knows the truth. You are showing that your energy is too valuable to be spent on convincing someone who is already convicted by their own conscience. And you are showing that your dignity is not for negotiation. The longer you hold that silence, the heavier it becomes on the other side. Because they will fill that silence with their own thoughts, their own guilt, and eventually their own regret. Distance has a way of forcing people to confront truths they would otherwise avoid. When you step back, when you withhold your presence, when you decide to stop pouring your energy into someone who took it for granted, you create a space that cannot be ignored. That space becomes a mirror, and in that mirror they are forced to see themselves more clearly. While you are near, while you are constantly available, while you respond to their calls, their texts, their demands, they never truly see the weight of their actions because they have a cushion. They know that no matter what they do, you will be there to catch them, to explain, to argue, to try again. But when you withdraw, when you decide that silence and distance are the only language worth speaking, suddenly they are stripped of that cushion. They are left alone with their choices, and those choices start echoing in their minds louder than your words ever could. Distance removes distraction. It takes away the noise, the back and forth, the endless cycle of explanations and apologies, the attempts to justify or cover up what has been done. In silence and separation, there is no dialogue to dilute the truth. There is only the raw reality of what they did, and that reality sits with them day and night. When someone is faced with distance, their mind begins to wander back to the moments they overlooked, the things they said without thinking, the actions they took for granted. They begin to replay the past not because you are reminding them, but because absence triggers reflection. The human mind naturally craves resolution, and when that resolution is not handed to them through your presence or your words, they are left searching for it within themselves. That searching leads to reflection, and that reflection opens the door to regret. Distance also reveals value. When you are around all the time, people can easily make the mistake of assuming your presence is permanent. They get used to your availability, they expect your support, they assume your forgiveness. But when you remove yourself, when you create space, they are suddenly confronted with the truth that nothing in life is guaranteed. Your absence highlights the importance of your presence in a way your words never could. It teaches them that you were never an option to be taken lightly. You were a privilege, and privileges can be lost. And it is in that realization that regret begins to grow. Think of it like water. A person who has access to clean water every day may never stop to appreciate its value. They drink it without thought. They waste it without care, because it is always there. But take that water away for a week, and suddenly every drop becomes priceless. Your distance works the same way. While you were available, they drank from the well of your kindness, your attention, and your love without stopping to value it. But the moment that well goes dry, the thirst of regret becomes unbearable. And the longer the drought, the deeper that regret sinks in. What distance does is shift the weight of responsibility. When you are constantly present, you carry the emotional burden. You carry the weight of fixing things, of making things work, of keeping the connection alive. But when you create distance, you put that weight back where it belongs, on the other person. They are forced to feel the emptiness. They are forced to sit in the silence. They are forced to wrestle with the consequences of their actions. And no matter how much they try to distract themselves, the quiet space you leave behind will keep reminding them of what they've lost. Distance is not just physical. It's emotional, mental, and spiritual. You may still be in the same room. You may still pass by each other in life. But when you detach, when you stop giving them your energy, they feel it immediately. Emotional withdrawal is more powerful than physical separation. When they realize that they no longer have access to your mind, your heart, or your attention, regret creeps in. Because what people miss the most is not the body of a person, but the energy of that person. The way you made them feel, the way you gave without hesitation, the way you cared without limits. When that energy is gone, they are left with an emptiness that no one else can easily replace. Reflection thrives in distance because distance is quiet, and quietness brings clarity. People begin to remember the moments they should have treated better, the opportunities they wasted, the kindness they dismissed. Their mind replays conversations. They recall your silence where words used to be, and they begin to feel the weight of all the times they didn't listen when you spoke. This is how regret takes root. It doesn't come when you argue with them, because in arguments they can still defend themselves. It doesn't come when you plead with them, because in pleading they feel superior. Regret only comes in distance when you are silent, when there is no more conversation to distract from the truth. That is when the mind turns inward, and the inward gaze reveals everything they tried to avoid. The longer you hold your silence, the more powerful this process becomes. Each day without your voice, without your presence, without your energy, adds another layer of weight on their conscience. They might ignore it at first. They might distract themselves. They might even try to replace you. But no matter what they do, distance has already planted the seed, and seeds grow in silence. The silence you hold, the space you create, the distance you maintain, these are the conditions in which regret grows stronger and stronger inside of them until it becomes impossible to escape. Your absence speaks with a language that words could never convey. When you are no longer available, when your presence is no longer easily accessible, it begins to echo in the mind of the one who once took you for granted. The truth is, people rarely notice what they have when it is constantly within reach. Familiarity blinds them. They start to assume your presence is permanent, that your kindness is endless, that your attention is guaranteed. But the moment you withdraw, the very moment you stop showing up, a shift takes place. That absence begins to scream louder than any explanation, louder than any confrontation, louder than any argument you could have delivered. It is in the emptiness of your absence that they begin to measure your true worth. When you are around, your voice, your actions, your energy create a sense of normalcy. They feel secure knowing you're there. They believe you will always answer, always show up, always forgive. But when that comfort is suddenly taken away, when the silence of your absence replaces the sound of your presence, it rattles them in ways they never expected. The absence becomes a teacher. It teaches them that nothing is promised, that people cannot be endlessly available, and that neglect has consequences. And that lesson is not delivered by words, it is delivered by the aching reality of your absence. Absence magnifies value. Think about how a song you've heard every day eventually becomes background noise. You don't notice its beauty. You don't pay attention to its rhythm because it's always there. But the moment you stop hearing it, the moment it's taken off the playlist, you suddenly remember how much it meant to you. You miss it, not because it changed, but because its absence reminded you of what it added to your life. That's exactly how your presence works. When you were there, they may have grown numb to it, but in your absence, every detail they overlooked comes rushing back. The way you spoke, the way you cared, the way you supported them, all of it becomes magnified in their memory. Absence also leaves space for imagination. And imagination is far more powerful than reality. When you are silent, when you are gone, they don't know what you're thinking. They don't know what you're doing. They don't know who you're with. That uncertainty gnaws at them. Their mind begins to wander into endless scenarios. They wonder if you've moved on, if someone else now receives the attention they once took for granted, if you're happier without them. The mind, in the silence of your absence, creates stories that are often far harsher than the truth. And those imagined stories stir regret deeper than any confrontation ever could. Your absence is not just about being physically gone. It's about withdrawing your energy, your focus, and your emotional availability. You can still be in the same place as someone, yet they feel your absence if you no longer pour into them what you once did. When you stop responding with the same warmth, when you no longer share your inner world, when you no longer give them the privilege of your energy, they feel it profoundly. And that kind of absence cuts deeper than distance, because it is a reminder that you've chosen to reclaim what they once mishandled. People often think words will change someone's behavior. They believe that if they explain enough, argue enough, justify enough, eventually the other person will see their value. But words rarely do what absence can. Words can be ignored, debated, or dismissed. Absence cannot. Absence forces acknowledgement. It creates a silence too loud to ignore. The quietness of your absence becomes a mirror reflecting their actions back to them. Every memory becomes sharper, every mistake becomes clearer, and every moment of neglect becomes heavier. Absence also strips away entitlement. When someone has constant access to you, entitlement grows unchecked. They believe they can always reach out, that you'll always answer, that no matter how they behave, you'll still be there. Your absence shatters that illusion. It reminds them that you are not an endless resource, that your presence is not a right but a gift. And when that gift is taken away, they begin to understand its value in a way they never could when it was freely given. Absence builds pressure. Time has a way of amplifying feelings. A short silence may not seem like much, but as days turn into weeks and weeks into months, the pressure builds within them. They may try to distract themselves. They may try to replace you. They may try to deny the emptiness, but eventually the absence grows heavier. Every reminder of you in their environment becomes sharper. A song, a place, a smell, a phrase. Suddenly everything reminds them of what they lost. And with each reminder, the weight of regret grows stronger. Your absence teaches more than your presence ever could because it confronts them with loss. Human beings often do not value what they have until it is gone. It is in the absence that they realize the depth of what they had, the uniqueness of what you offered, the irreplaceable nature of your presence. And once that realization strikes, regret follows closely behind. The absence becomes unbearable, not because you shouted, not because you begged, but because the silence of your absence carved a permanent space that nothing else can fill. Silence reveals something deeper than words ever could. It reveals self-respect. When you choose silence, you are sending a message that you refuse to waste your energy explaining yourself to someone who already knows the truth of what they did. You are showing that your value is not up for debate, that your dignity is not something that can be bargained with, and that your peace is more important than trying to convince someone to see what they chose to ignore. Self-respect is not loud. It doesn't announce itself. It doesn't demand validation. It doesn't beg for recognition. Self-respect is quiet, calm, steady, and unshakable. And when you embrace silence after being mistreated, you are demonstrating a level of self-respect that words could never achieve. In a world where so many are quick to react, quick to argue, quick to prove themselves, choosing silence separates you. It shows that you do not need to be part of the noise. It shows that you are not desperate to be understood because you already understand your own worth. Self-respect is knowing that not everyone deserves an explanation. Not everyone is worthy of your energy. Not every situation requires you to defend yourself. When you stay silent, you are protecting your dignity from being dragged into a battlefield that would only drain you. You are saying, without words, that your self-respect matters more than winning an argument. When you stop explaining, you reclaim power. Think about how often people get caught in endless cycles of trying to prove themselves. They try to justify why they feel hurt. They try to explain why they deserve better. They argue in hopes that the other person will finally understand. But the more you explain, the more you hand your power away because you're giving the other person control over how you see yourself. Self-respect means you no longer play that game. You don't explain, you don't justify, you don't argue, you simply walk in silence. And that silence speaks louder than anything you could have said because it shows that you refuse to lower yourself to a level where your worth is questioned. Silence also teaches the other person that access to you is a privilege. When you no longer respond, when you no longer explain, when you no longer try to make them see, you are showing that you have boundaries. Boundaries are the highest form of self-respect because they say, I know what I deserve, and I will not accept less. Silence is one of the strongest boundaries you can set because it is unshakable. You are not engaging, you are not entertaining disrespect, you are not giving them the satisfaction of knowing they can pull you into conflict. You are drawing a line without ever needing to speak it. Self-respect also means valuing your peace over their approval. There comes a point when you realize that no matter how much you talk, no matter how much you argue, no matter how much you explain, some people will never change. And trying to make them understand only steals your energy and leaves you drained. Silence is the act of choosing peace instead. It is saying, I will not let your actions dictate my energy. I will protect my inner world. That protection is what keeps your dignity intact. It allows you to rise above the situation instead of being pulled into it. When you choose silence, you also show maturity. Immaturity reacts, maturity responds. And the highest form of response is often no response at all. That does not mean you don't feel pain. That does not mean you're unaffected. It means you've reached a level of self-respect where you no longer need to prove your pain to someone who caused it. You no longer need to explain your worth to someone who refused to see it. You no longer need to fight for recognition from someone who never valued it in the first place. Silence becomes your armor, and that armor is built from self-respect. Another powerful truth about silence and self-respect is that it forces the other person to deal with their own conscience. When you argue, when you fight back, you give them a distraction. They can focus on the argument instead of their actions. They can twist your words, they can deflect, they can shift the blame. But when you are silent, there is nothing to distract them. There are no words to twist, no argument to win, no reaction to feed off. All that remains is their own reflection. And in that reflection, regret is born. But the only reason that regret grows is because your silence made it clear that you respect yourself too much to keep playing the game. Silence backed by self-respect also creates mystery. People expect reactions. They expect anger. They expect begging. They expect you to try to explain. When you don't give them what they expect, they are forced to rethink. They begin to wonder what you're thinking, what you're feeling, what you're planning. That uncertainty unsettles them. It plants doubt in their mind because your silence shows that you are no longer predictable. Predictability gives them power, but silence strips that away. And when they can no longer predict you, they can no longer control you. That is the highest demonstration of self-respect. You have taken back control by refusing to react. Every time you remain silent instead of reacting, you are reminding yourself that you are enough. You are reminding yourself that your worth is not measured by their ability to recognize it. You are reminding yourself that peace and dignity are worth more than words spoken in frustration. You are reminding yourself that your silence is not empty. It is full of meaning, full of strength, full of boundaries. That is what self-respect looks like in action. It is silent, but it is unshakable. Regret does not arrive in the heat of an argument. It does not come when emotions are flaring and words are being exchanged back and forth. Regret comes in the stillness, in the quietness, in the space where you are no longer present to absorb their excuses, their justifications, or their empty promises. It is in the silence you create that regret finds its voice. Because when you are gone, when you are no longer responding, when your absence becomes undeniable, that is when their mind begins to replay everything they did wrong. Every careless word, every moment they dismissed you, every opportunity they wasted to treat you better. It all comes rushing back, louder and heavier than anything you could have reminded them of. Regret grows in the emptiness you leave behind, in the space you no longer fill, and in the silence that forces them to face themselves. When you were present, they could ignore their mistakes because they had distractions. They could drown out the weight of their behavior with your responses, your arguments, your explanations. They could point fingers, deflect responsibility, and twist the narrative because you were still engaging with them. But once you step back, once you withhold your voice, they no longer have that shield. There is nothing left for them to argue with, no excuses left to hide behind. All that remains is their own conscience, and conscience has a way of replaying the truth over and over until it becomes unbearable. Regret is a seed that is planted the moment someone makes a mistake, but it doesn't grow immediately. At first, they may feel justified. At first, they may even feel powerful for what they did. But when you go silent, when you remove your presence, the conditions change. That silence becomes the soil, that distance becomes the water, and that emptiness becomes the sunlight. Slowly, the seed of regret begins to sprout. It grows quietly, it grows steadily, and it grows stronger with time. The longer you hold your silence, the more that regret takes root in their heart. What they once ignored becomes undeniable. What they once dismissed becomes heavy. What they once laughed off begins to haunt them in the middle of the night. The truth is, regret is not born from confrontation. It is born from reflection. And reflection only happens in the absence of noise. When you argue with them, they can focus on the argument instead of their actions. When you chase after them, they can focus on your pursuit instead of their neglect. When you plead, they can focus on your desperation instead of their wrongdoing. But when you do nothing, when you are silent, when you are gone, they have no escape. They are left with themselves, and that is the one battle they cannot win. Silence removes the distractions, and in that void, regret becomes louder and louder until it can no longer be ignored. Regret also feeds on memory. The mind has a way of replaying the past when it is triggered by loss. When you are gone, everything begins to remind them of you. A song you loved, a place you used to go together, a phrase you used to say. Suddenly, those things that once felt ordinary become heavy reminders. And each reminder stirs the conscience. Each reminder makes them realize how much they overlooked, how much they took for granted, how much they failed to appreciate. That is how regret grows. It attaches itself to memory, and memory is everywhere. The longer you are silent, the more they are forced to live with those reminders, and the heavier their regret becomes. There is also a deeper truth. Regret is amplified by the realization that time cannot be reversed. When they finally recognize what they had, when they finally see your value in the quietness of your absence, they are also struck by the reality that they cannot undo the damage. They cannot erase the words they spoke. They cannot take back the moments they chose to disrespect you. They cannot go back and treat you the way they should have. This realization hits harder in silence because silence makes it clear that you have moved beyond explanation, beyond negotiation, beyond trying to make them see. Silence makes it undeniable that the moment has passed, and with it, the chance they once had. That realization fuels regret more than anything else, because regret always grows strongest when people realize they cannot go back. The longer you hold silence, the more regret deepens. At first, they may try to brush it off. They may try to distract themselves. They may even convince themselves they don't care. But silence has a way of breaking down those defenses. Days turn into weeks, weeks into months. And with each passing moment, the reality becomes clearer. You are no longer there, and they are responsible for it. That responsibility weighs on them quietly at first, but with time it becomes overwhelming. The absence they thought they could handle becomes unbearable, and the regret they thought they could avoid becomes a constant companion. Regret grows in the empty spaces where your presence once lived. It grows in the silence of unanswered calls, in the void of unread messages, in the quiet nights where they once had your voice. It grows in the spaces where you once laughed, in the conversations that no longer exist, in the energy that is no longer theirs to receive. Every gap you leave behind becomes fertile ground for regret, and regret thrives in that space. the longer you withhold your presence, the longer you remain silent, the more those empty spaces multiply and the stronger their regret becomes. Regret is most powerful because it cannot be silenced. They can ignore your words, they can dismiss your arguments, but they cannot escape their own thoughts. And those thoughts grow louder the longer you are gone. They wake up in the middle of the night remembering what they did. They look at others and compare them to you. They hear your silence and it becomes deafening. They begin to realize that the love, the kindness, the support, the energy you gave cannot be found again so easily. And in that realization, regret grows into something far heavier than they ever expected to carry. The one who speaks less always holds the greater power because silence creates an undeniable shift in the balance of control. When you choose silence, you reclaim the authority that was once handed over through endless explanations, arguments, or reactions. You stop feeding the cycle that drains your energy and start operating from a place of strength. People often think that control is about dominating conversations, raising their voice, or forcing the other person to listen. But true control is the ability to withhold when everything inside you wants to release. That restraint is not weakness, it is mastery. Silence does not make you smaller, it makes you unshakable because you are no longer governed by impulses or the need for validation. You are making a conscious choice to let your silence do the talking, and that choice places the power squarely back in your hands. When you argue, when you plead, when you keep trying to make someone see your worth, you are giving them control over your energy. They can twist your words, they can dismiss your emotions, they can use your reaction as fuel to keep the cycle going. But silence strips them of that fuel, it starves them of the reaction they were counting on. Without your words, without your energy, they are left with nothing but themselves, and that is where the true shift begins. You are no longer dancing to their tune. You are no longer feeding their need for control. And in that moment, the tables turn. The one who controls their tongue always controls the dynamic. Silence places you in a position of mystery, and mystery is powerful. People are unsettled by what they cannot predict. When you are vocal, when you constantly express how you feel, when you react to everything they do, they can predict your behavior. And predictability gives them comfort. But silence removes that comfort. Suddenly, they don't know what you are thinking. They don't know how you feel. They don't know whether you've moved on, whether you're stronger without them, or whether you even care anymore. That uncertainty disturbs them more than any argument ever could. In silence, you become unreadable, and when you're unreadable, you become uncontrollable. That loss of control forces them to confront the possibility that you are no longer within their grasp, and that realization is where regret takes root. Silence also creates space for reflection, but not just for them. It creates space for you too. When you're caught in constant reaction, your mind is clouded, your energy is scattered, and your emotions are always at the mercy of someone else's behavior. But when you hold silence, you reclaim your clarity. You give yourself the room to breathe, to think, to realign with who you are and what you deserve. That inner alignment strengthens you, and strength always shifts the dynamic of power. They may not understand what has changed, but they will feel it. They will sense that your silence is not emptiness, but fullness. Fullness of self-respect, fullness of dignity, fullness of control. The longer you remain silent, the more that power builds. At first, they may test you, they may try to provoke you, they may even convince themselves that your silence means nothing. But silence is not fragile, it is patient. With time, silence begins to weigh heavier than any words could. Days turn into weeks, and that silence becomes undeniable. It presses on their conscience, it gnaws at their confidence, it unsettles their sense of control. They start to realize that they are no longer the center of your attention, and that loss shakes them deeply. Because attention is power, and when you remove your attention, you remove their control. Silence is also a declaration of independence. It shows that you no longer need their validation to feel secure. You are no longer dependent on their recognition to affirm your value. By not speaking, you are saying that your worth does not require their acknowledgement. That independence terrifies those who once relied on your reactions to feel significant, because your silence shows them that you are self-sufficient, that you do not need to chase, that you do not need to beg, that you do not need to lower yourself to be heard. The power dynamic shifts entirely, because the one who needs nothing always holds